I walked past him every morning for almost 4 months before I realized I couldn't remember his face. I could remember the jacket. I could remember exactly where he stood. I could remember the angle of his shoulders against the trees. But when I tried to put a face on him, and I have tried a lot, there's nothing there. Just a smudge where a person should be. And the reason that scares me, even now, years later, is that on the second to last day of school, I saw him somewhere he should not have been able to get to, and by then it was already too late to do anything about it. I'm not going to use my name. I've only told this to 2 people in my life, and both of them said I was probably making more of it than it was. Maybe. I've gone back and forth. But the parts that bother me aren't the parts that sound scary out loud. They're the small ones. The ones you only notice when the year is ending and the building is emptying out, and you finally have a second to look around. My last semester of high school, my routine was paper thin. Up at 6, school by 7:15. I parked in the same back row of the student lot because the front rows filled up too fast, and I cut across the backfield instead of walking around. There was a section of chain link fence behind the field that had been bent up at the bottom for as long as anyone could remember. Everyone used it as a shortcut. Teachers knew. By spring, nobody cared. The first time I saw him, I didn't really see him. That's what's hard to explain. I just have a memory of looking up from my phone and registering a man standing on the other side of the fence, near the tree line, wearing a jacket that was way too heavy for the weather. I figured he was a dad waiting for someone, or a contractor. There had been work on the gym roof that month. I went through the fence and walked past him and forgot about it. I want you to understand. He filed himself into the background the way everyone does in a place you go to every morning. I didn't think about him again for weeks. It was the middle of May when I realized I'd seen him more than once. I was eating lunch outside with my friend. We'd been sitting on the curb by the auto shop because the cafeteria smelled like bleach that whole month. And she said something offhand about a guy who'd been hanging around the parking lot. Not as a warning, as gossip. She said her boyfriend had seen him too. Older, heavy jacket, just stands there. I felt this strange click in my chest. Not fear, recognition. Like hearing a song you forgot you knew. I said, wait, by the trees? She said, yeah. And then we laughed about it. Because what else are you supposed to do? We decided he was probably someone's uncle, or a creep, or a neighborhood guy who liked to walk around. Her boyfriend was going to say something to him if he saw him again, in the way high school boys say things they never actually do. After that conversation, I started seeing him every morning. I don't think he showed up more often. I think I was finally looking. He was always in roughly the same area, past the bent fence, sometimes closer to the trees, sometimes leaning against a utility box that nobody could explain. He never spoke. He never seemed to be doing anything. A couple of times he had what I thought was a coffee cup. Most times his hands were empty. And then one morning I noticed something that made my stomach drop, and I want to be specific about it because it's the detail that changed everything for me. He didn't have a car. There was no car nearby, no bike, no bus stop within sight. There was no road on that side of the field. To be standing where he was standing, you had to come on foot through a creek bed from a neighborhood that was a 15-minute walk away. Every morning, in a heavy jacket, to stand at a fence behind a high school and not do anything. I changed my route. I started parking on the front side and going in through the main doors. I told myself it was because the back field was muddy. It had not rained in over a week. For the last 2 weeks of school, I didn't see him at all, and I started to feel stupid about the whole thing. I told myself I'd built it up in my head. I told myself I was a senior with too much free time and not enough left to worry about. Then came the second to last day of school. It was a half day. Most people had already cleared out their lockers, signed yearbooks, done all the last day rituals. The hallways had that hollow echo they get when there are more lockers than students. I had stayed late because I'd left a hoodie in a third-floor classroom, and I wanted it back. It took me longer to find it than it should have. By the time I came out into the parking lot, it was past 3, and the lot was almost completely empty. My car was on the front side of the building, so I had no reason to be anywhere near the back field. I was walking across the asphalt, keys in my hand, when I heard something behind me, a door, or a footstep on gravel. I don't know which. I turned automatically and looked up at the building. He was inside the school. He was on the second floor, behind the long row of windows that look out over the front lot, and he was looking down, not at me, just down. Standing perfectly still in that heavy jacket on the other side of glass that was supposed to be locked. I had walked out of that building 10 minutes earlier. I got into my car so fast I scraped my hand on the door frame, and I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. I didn't tell anyone for 2 days. When I finally told my mom, she called the school. They said they'd look into it. I don't know what that meant. I never found out. I graduated 3 days later, and the ceremony was in the gym, which has its own entrance, and I never set foot in that building again. But the part that haunts me, the part I cannot let go of, is that I had walked past him for months, close enough to see his face, and I cannot remember his face. I can remember the jacket. I can remember the shape of his shoulders. I can remember the way he stood. But the face isn't there. It's like my brain refused to file it, and I think sometimes that maybe he wanted it that way. That standing perfectly still, day after day, in the same spot, in the same jacket, was how he made himself into background. How he made 90 teenagers walk past him every morning without ever really seeing him. The bent fence had been there forever. Everybody knew about it, and nobody, not once, in 4 years, ever asked who else might know. But the thing about the man at the fence is, at least I saw him. At least I knew he existed. The next thing that happened to me, almost a year later, I didn't see anything at all, and that, somehow, was worse. My freshman year of college, I lived in a long rectangular dorm. 2 wings, 4 floors, a lounge on each floor with a microwave and a TV nobody watched. My room was on the 3rd floor near the stairwell. My roommate had moved out in March. Her grandmother was sick, and the housing office never replaced her. So for the last 2 months of the year, I had the room to myself. That sounded great. At first it was. Around finals, the building started to empty out in waves. People with early flights left first. Then the people whose last exam was Monday, then Tuesday, then Wednesday. By Thursday of finals week, my floor was maybe a third full. By Friday, it was almost nothing. I had 1 exam left, Saturday morning, and then I was driving home Sunday. Thursday night, around 11:30, I was studying with my door closed when I heard someone walk down the hall and stop outside my room. I know how that sounds. People walk down hallways. But I had learned the rhythm of who was still on the floor. The slap of the girl in 3/12's flip, flops. The squeak of the kid across from me, whose backpack hit the wall every time he turned a corner. And these footsteps didn't match any of them. They were heavier, slower, and they stopped right outside my door. I waited for a knock. There was no knock. I counted. 20 seconds, 30. The lamp next to my bed was on, which meant a strip of light was clearly visible under the door. Whoever was out there knew somebody was inside. After what felt like a full minute, the footsteps started again and went down the hall toward the stairwell. I didn't get up to look. I'm not proud of that. I think part of me already knew that if I opened the door, I'd have to make a decision, and I didn't want to make a decision the night before my last exam. The next morning, Friday, I noticed something on my way to breakfast that should have meant nothing. The door to the lounge at the end of my hall was propped open with a folded piece of cardboard. It had been closed and locked the night before. I figured maintenance had been in, or somebody was moving out. The lounges were supposed to lock automatically, but they got propped open all the time during move-out week. But here's the thing I didn't think about until I was already back in my room, with the door locked behind me. The lounge at the end of my hall had a window that looked directly down the corridor. If you were sitting in there with the lights off, you could see every door on the floor. You could see who came in, who went out, and which rooms still had lights on at night. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had an exam in less than 24 hours. I needed to sleep. Friday night, 11:30, the footstep came back. Same hour, same heaviness, same pause outside my door. Except this time, they didn't leave after a minute. I counted past 2, past 3. I sat completely still on my bed with the lamp on and my back against the headboard. And I listened to someone stand on the other side of my door for what my phone clock later told me was almost 6 minutes. And then, and this is the part I have never been able to shake, I heard a sound that was not a footstep. It was a soft, deliberate scrape against the wood of my door, low down, around waist height, like someone running a fingernail across it, slowly once. Then the footsteps left. I didn't sleep. I sat up the rest of the night with every light in the room on. At some point, around 3 in the morning, I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack and looked at the outside of the wood, low down, where the scrape had come from. There was a mark, a single, thin line across the paint. It could have been there for weeks. I had never looked. I took my exam Saturday morning. When I came back to my room around noon, the cardboard in the lounge door was gone, and the door was locked. I walked down and tried it just to be sure. It didn't move. I was supposed to leave Sunday. I packed in 3 hours, threw everything into my car, and left Saturday afternoon. I drove 8 hours straight through and got home at 1 in the morning. My dad opened the door confused and didn't ask why I was a day early. Here is the part I didn't put together until weeks later, sitting at my parents' kitchen table. The lounges in that dorm used the same master key as the dorm rooms. The same key. Anyone with that key, a maintenance worker, an RA, a former I who never returned theirs, anyone who had copied or stolen one, could move freely between the lounges and any bedroom in the building. The prop door wasn't to keep the lounge open. The prop door was to keep it from locking behind somebody who wanted to come and go without using the key in front of a camera. And then I thought about the window. Whoever had been in that lounge had been watching the hallway. They had been there long enough on Thursday to learn which rooms still had lights on at midnight. By Friday, more than half the floor had emptied out. By Friday night, there were only 2 or 3 rooms on the entire wing still occupied. They knew. They had counted. I never reported it. I had nothing to report. A person walked down a hallway. A door was propped open. A line was scratched on my door that could have been anything. None of it was a crime. But I think about that scrape a lot. I think about how it was deliberate and quiet and at exactly the height a hand would naturally fall to. And I think about the fact that whoever made it wanted me to know, later, after they were gone, that they had been standing close enough to touch the wood. I requested a different dorm the next year. I never went back into that building again. The man at the fence stood far away, where I could see him. The person at the door got close enough to mark it. But the third thing that happened to me 2 years after that didn't involve a stranger at a distance, and it didn't involve a stranger in a hallway. By the time I realized something was wrong, the person had already been in my apartment, and I had been writing notes on their homework for 16 weeks. My senior year of college, I was a teaching assistant for a lower division class. Big lecture, about 90 students. My job was to grade papers and run 1 discussion section a week. I knew maybe 15 of them by name. The rest were faces. The week after final grades were submitted, I got an email from a student I didn't recognize. The name on the email wasn't in my roster. I checked. I had the roster open in another tab. The name wasn't there, but the email referenced specific things from the class. An essay prompt I had written, a discussion we'd had about a reading, even a comment I had made in section about how I graded thesis statements. Specific, detailed, clearly someone who had been in the room. The email itself was polite. It thanked me for the semester. It said they had appreciated my feedback. It wished me a good summer. And then, in the second to last paragraph, almost as an afterthought, it said this: "I've seen you a few times at the coffee shop near your apartment. I always wanted to say hi but didn't want to bother you." I read that sentence 3 times. I lived 25 minutes from campus. The coffee shop they named was 2 blocks from my front door. It was not near campus. It was not on the way to anything. It was a neighborhood place. You had to be in my neighborhood to know it existed. I went back to the roster and searched the name again. Nothing. I searched the university directory. Nothing. The name on the email did not exist at the university. The email was a generic Gmail address, first initial, last name, 3 numbers. I forwarded it to the professor I worked for and flagged it as strange. He wrote back the next day and said it was strange, but there wasn't much to do about it, and to let him know if I got any more. I never did. What I got instead, about a week later, was a feeling. I want to describe this carefully, because it's the kind of thing that's easy to dismiss. Nothing was missing from my apartment. Nothing was obviously moved. But a drawer in my kitchen, the one I keep silverware in, wasn't closed all the way. I am the kind of person who closes drawers. A book that lived on my nightstand was on the wrong side of the lamp. The shower curtain was bunched at one end of the rod. I always spread it out so it could dry. Any one of those things I could have done myself. Together, I couldn't account for them. I told myself I was being paranoid. The email had gotten in my head. I went to bed and tried to forget about it. 2 nights later, I came home from a late shift at the library, and I noticed something in the bathroom that I have not been able to explain to this day. My toothbrush was wet. It wasn't damp from the morning. It was actively wet. There was a small pool of water in the bristles. I had not used it since 6 a.m. It was almost midnight. A toothbrush does not stay wet for 18 hours. I stood in my bathroom holding it for a long time. I checked the cup it sat in. The cup was wet too. I checked the sink. There were a few small water droplets on the rim that had not dried. I did not sleep at my apartment that night. I drove to a friend's place and told her I'd had a fight with a neighbor and didn't want to deal with it. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock changed. I told my landlord I'd lost my keys. He charged me $80 and didn't ask any questions. I moved out at the end of the month. I lost my deposit. I didn't care. I never got another email. I never heard from the name again. I have, over the years, considered every possible innocent explanation. That I'm misremembering the toothbrush, that the drawer was always like that I was tired and stressed, and the email had primed me to see patterns that weren't there. But here's what I keep coming back to. Whoever sent that email had received feedback from me, which means they had submitted essays, which means they had been enrolled in the class under a different name. They had sat in my discussion section, almost certainly, because they referenced things I had only said in section. For 16 weeks, they had watched me talk. They had heard the way I laughed. They had learned my mannerisms, my opinions, my habits. They had followed me at some point, far enough off campus to learn which coffee shop I went to in a neighborhood that had nothing to do with the university. And they waited. They waited until grades were submitted. They waited until the semester was over. They waited until I had no professional reason to interact with them anymore, and no roster to check them against, and no authority over their grade. And then, the moment the structure ended, they wrote to me. Like a friend. Like somebody who had been meaning to reach out. The class was the cover. The end of the semester was when the cover came off. I work in a different city now, different state. I don't put my last name on anything public. I still close drawers all the way. I still notice when a shower curtain is bunched. I lock my door behind me when I come home, and I check it twice. And most nights I check it a third time before bed. I know that's not normal. I don't care. It's a small thing to give up. I don't think these three things were connected. I don't think the same person was watching me for years. I think they were three separate, small wrongnesses that happened to me at three separate ends of three separate school years. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. I think most people have one of these stories, and they don't tell anyone, because individually each piece sounds like nothing. A man at a fence, footsteps in a hallway, a wet toothbrush. But here's the thing nobody tells you about a school year. A school year is a structure. It puts the same people in the same rooms with the same routines for months at a time. And during those months, you stop seeing the individuals. You see the crowd, you see the routine, you see the version of the world that the structure builds for you. And then the structure ends. The students leave. The buildings empty out. The hallways go quiet. The classmates you spent 9 months next to disappear back into the country. And you're left in a place that suddenly has too much space in it. And in that space, the people who had been hiding inside the routine, the ones the structure was concealing, they become visible. Just for a moment. Just long enough for you to notice them. And the worst part, the part I can't stop thinking about, is that if you notice them, it means they noticed you first. Probably a long time ago. Probably back when you didn't even know to look. So I'll ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. At the end of your last school year, high school, college, whichever one comes to mind, who was the person you saw every day, in the same place, doing the same thing, that you never once stopped to wonder about? Because they wondered about you. And the year is always going to end.